Joining our broadcast is Mykola Malomuzh, General of the Ukrainian Army and Head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine from 2005 to 2010. Nikolai Grigorievich, we are glad to welcome you. Glory to Ukraine.
Hello.
Greetings. Glory to the heroes.
Nikolai Grigorievich, I would like to start our conversation with that very 40-day program of the President, the program or SBU operation, which is intended to force Russia to end the war. What do you think these 40 days might include? And why exactly this time frame, actually?
Well, first of all, it should be noted that this program concerns not only the special services, as the President mentioned, but actually involves the activities of the entire Ukrainian security system. This includes all branches of the armed forces and, above all, unmanned systems. It also includes the Special Operations Forces. This includes the airborne assault troops and the Marine infantry. This includes the Security Service of Ukraine, the main intelligence directorate, and other attached forces. It also includes the border guards and specially trained units for operations targeting specific objectives. Such a comprehensive approach is the only way to undermine Russia's strength and, in approximately 42, let me emphasize, 60 days, systematically limit their mobilization capabilities and the capabilities of specific units. This means destruction both at the front, in the frontline zone, and in the preparation areas because the program provides for strikes against all enemy systems. This includes, so to speak, the frontline and near-front zones, as well as strategic military targets up to 2,000 kilometers deep. These are strikes against the enemy's launch capabilities. This includes aviation, missile systems, and unmanned systems, both their combat components and their production facilities. These are defense industry facilities, energy infrastructure, and not just oil refineries. These are power plants, thermal power stations, as we can see already in Crimea itself, on Russian territory and in the occupied territories. Such a comprehensive and multifaceted approach will truly undermine the enemy's capabilities, both in offensive operations and in replenishing their forces, especially personnel and equipment, and of course, in the supply of support systems, primarily fuel, because fuel is a key factor in warfare. Oh, I think that planning for all possibilities, especially when we're talking about strike positions, means using drones of various types and scaling them up by tens of times, which we've been doing throughout this year. These are new developments, ones that have long been necessary, as well as our older missile systems, both short and medium range, from 300 to 3,000 kilometers. All of these means should provide an effective model for neutralizing the enemy's efforts. And of course, this is a special operation. This is already our professional task to carry out specific actions against particular targets, for example, to conduct certain operations within a set period, say in 30 or 40 days, to launch massive operations to destroy specific targets, such as factories, airfields, bridges, those that still remain, for instance, in relation to Crimea, as well as throughout the entire logistics chain where they supply ammunition, equipment, and manpower. I think this is how they will work systematically. Well, they've already hinted a bit that they've assigned this task to the special services, the SBU, and intelligence agencies. But this is not. It's active and very sensitive, but it won't solve the overall problem, because the scale needs to be tens or even hundreds of times greater.
Nikolai Grigorievich, regarding the fact that not only, let's say, is the logistics being disrupted, but of course the fuel shortage in temporarily occupied Crimea is also a very effective way to at least prevent the southern regions from supplying, so to speak, enemy troops. But what about some other facilities? Last night, drones struck the SACKGASSE thermal power plant in Crimea, after which a fire broke out. Preliminarily, 16 explosions were heard in SACKGASSE. Residents of Simferopol, Sevastopol, and Feodosia also heard a series of explosions. And indeed, at the same time, the occupation authorities in Sevastopol have already warned that there may be no electricity for 2 to 5 hours due to, as they explain, disruptions. In some areas, even the traffic lights have stopped working. How do you assess the cutting off of Crimea, not only from logistics, but essentially from the ability, as they say, to help enemy troops remain there, not just the Black Sea Fleet? How do you assess the overall situation, this program of turning the peninsula into an island?
Well, I think that even in our broadcast 2 or 3 years ago, we put forward the concept that Crimea should not be used as some kind of base for defense or for launching attacks against our country as a whole, but rather turned into a trap, a closed sector, as you say, like an island, and then simply liberated. And we propose not to launch an offensive, for example, not to create a dragon's teeth situation in the Zaporizhzhia region, but instead to destroy the bridges, namely the Kerch crossings, all the ferry lines, and accordingly, all the airfields, there are 5 of them, the missile launch sites, the fleet, which is what we are doing now, as well as the oil refineries and the supply of related materials. And Crimea turns into not just an island. It turns, so to speak, into a closed circuit where we can simply destroy both military units and forces and assets, as well as supply systems that might still remain, such as attempts to use ferries, which we especially did not destroy, or some ships which we kept under control anyway. In other words, conditions were essentially created for panic in Crimea. These are the military, and in 2023, I'll say, even at the beginning, many military personnel, and even more so their family members who are very sensitive to this, were already shouting that they needed to flee because there would be no way left to get to Russian territory. And now they are doing just that. There are already lines forming. People are no longer going there for vacation, but heading back instead. Not just vacationers, but those who moved there, as they like to say, the occupiers, over the past 12 years. That's how they feel now, because there's neither gasoline nor electricity, that's it. And most importantly, we are cutting off the communications that would allow them to retreat or escape. This is the kind of approach that needs to be strengthened today. And the destruction of the TPP, which we're talking about today, in arm, there, for example, the Armenian ones, the destruction of new routes and ferries, where in some places the lines are 10 to 15 kilometers long. For example, in the Kerch direction, there was an 18-kilometer long line. This is already something concrete. And if there are massive strikes on all targets, military, civilian, and especially energy, communications, and supply infrastructure, that will cause a very powerful panic. And panic among millions of people, especially the military, will inevitably spread further. This will not be a condition achieved through some diplomatic means. Like he says, we'll negotiate. And Putin says, I'll never give up Crimea. There simply won't be any other option. That will be the condition for the liberation of Crimea. But we need to reach that point through hard work.
Let me add some more information that Natalia mentioned. Last night in Feodosia, another Pantsir anti-aircraft missile and gun system was destroyed by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Now, about the Pantsers, Nikolai Grigorievich. After all, when they were created, no one could have even imagined that they would be used against drones. So how does this mismatch now characterize the entire Russian air defense system as a whole? In other words, the Pantsers are outdated, while the Ukrainian drones are ultra-modern.
Russia is failing to scale up its anti-drone air defense systems in time. In this situation, they are trying to use the missile capabilities of old models and some new ones, but specifically those systems that we currently have. And I'll say it directly, these are modernized systems that operate automatically against multiple targets. Russia is currently lagging behind. Yes, we shouldn't relax and must keep taking action, but Russia is forced to use the standard equipment that is designed to counter missiles. And these Pantsir systems, the Pantsir S and others that Russia uses against our drones, first of all, represent significant financial costs. And on the other hand, as was said in that film, you simply can't have enough of these Pantsers to counter drones. Drones are flying by the hundreds, thousands, and if you look at it over a month, it's tens of thousands. And in the future, it will be hundreds of thousands. And over a year, millions. Russia definitely doesn't have that many Pantsir missiles, nor do they have the capacity to produce that many. They tried to use the S-300 and S-400, another system that supposedly works effectively against everything, missiles, airplanes, and especially drones. But even here, each shot costs millions, sometimes even several $1 million. That's why, at the moment, all of this is extremely expensive, inconsistent, and ineffective. Remember, we are breaking through many positions, 3 or even 4 zones in some places, the so-called defense zones, as they say, near and in Moscow. In other words, the Pantsirs do not fully provide complete protection. And even more so in Crimea. Right now, we are striking at the Pantsirs, at the S-300, S-400, S-500 systems, at airfields and other assets. And this is already the clearing of the territory from all these Pantsirs and other defensive systems.
Nikolai Grigorievich, as the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Alexander Syrsky, says Ukraine's strategic goal is to reach the point where the Kremlin exhausts its ability to continue the war, because Russia has not abandoned its intentions to further seize Ukrainian territories. How do you assess, let's also pay attention to today's shelling. Lately, there have been, if I may say so, rather meager attacks in the form of 1 or 2 isolated missiles targeting Ukrainian territory, including last night. And what does this mean? Is this finally exhaustion, or is it saving up and stockpiling? How do you assess this?
Of course, we shouldn't relax, under no circumstances, neither militarily nor for individual civilians. And we should always take precautions because any missile is, of course, a threat to life. That's right. But for now, we are effectively shooting them down. This night showed that, yes, there was indeed tension in the capital, but almost all targets were shot down. There is some damage and even some casualties, but the effectiveness is high. I want to emphasize once again that the enemy is probing different tactics, trying to carry out pinpoint strikes, attempting to deliver preemptive blows so that we agree to a peace agreement, and threatening people in order to push us to support peace, but only according to Russia's terms. But this is no longer working, and that's why a sense of hopelessness is setting in. But Putin still believes that an aggressive approach will work. He is trying to use this old worn-out formula, if not by force, then by persistence, putting pressure on all structures, including the Americans and us, and through terror, trying to pressure the citizens of Ukraine. We told him on the very first day, literally as soon as the war began, that the people of Ukraine cannot be defeated. The spirit of Ukrainians is indomitable. So all these strikes are, of course, another attempt to suppress us, but it isn't working. And now to the point. They still have several thousand ballistic missiles, somewhere around 2,000, maybe 2,200. And of course, cruise missiles as well. They have dozens and dozens of zircons and kinzhals. So at some point, for example, they could prepare and carry out very large-scale operations. That's why we are preparing for any scenario. That's it. But the enemy no longer has the forces and resources they had at the beginning. They also don't have enough missile systems to conduct systematic military operations or even systematic terrorist strikes. That's why they alternate between small strikes and large-scale ones, depending on the objective set.
Or it's a certain change in tactics, yes? Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikolai Grigorievich. Nikolai Malomuzh, General of the Army of Ukraine, Head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine from 2005 to 2010, was with us on the line.
In the Freedom app, you'll find live broadcasts, special projects, reports from around the world, and up-to-date analysis. All the most important things right on your smartphone. Simple, fast, convenient, and free. Download the Freedom app from the Apple Store or Play Market. One click, and you're at the heart of the action. Knowing everything with Freedom is easy. Freedom